Ave Maris Stella.
Hello and welcome back to Vatican II in a Year. I am your host, Father Matthew Schneider, a priest of the Legionaries of Christ and a theology professor. This is a podcast on the StarQuest Production Network at sqpn.com. Today we're on day 351 and we're covering Gaudium et Spes 75 on It's Good to Have Judicial and Political Structures for Man. If you want to follow along, we have a reading plan and more details at sqpn.com/Vatican or frmatthewlc.com/Vatican. Yesterday we spoke about we make community which needs authority, but that authority must be just in seeking the common good. Today we continue with Chapter 4, the life of the political community. And the summary of today is everyone has a duty to participate in politics and we should prepare people for this. Paragraph 75 is a little longer. It has 6 subparagraphs and it's the last one we have that's over 700 words. We're going to read it in 5 parts. A, structure should allow every person to participate. B, civil law should provide for division of positive law and functions. C and D, public authority now intervenes more but also must do so in a limited way. E, Christians should witness to the common good in political action. And F, we need to form all in civics and some for political office. So let's begin on 75A. The summary is, structure should allow every person to participate. A, it is in full conformity with the human nature that there should be juridical political structures providing all citizens, in an ever better fashion, and without any discrimination, the practical possibility of freely and actively taking part in the establishment of the judicial foundation of the political community and in direction of public affairs. In fixing the terms of reference of the various public bodies and the election of political leaders. All citizens, therefore, should be mindful of the right and also the duty to use their free vote to further the common good. The Church praises and esteems the work of those who, for the good of men, devote themselves to the service of the state and take on the burdens of this office. We see in this subparagraph from Vatican II a strong endorsement of democracy. Now, this does not say it has to be democracy directly. There can be other ways which people are able to be involved, but this is a strong endorsement of democracy as at least one of those ways. And what we see here is that people should have the possibility of involvement on various layers, on all the different layers. From the simplest thing of voting to being involved, running for office, running some kind of political action committee, running some kind of activist group, etc. And there is a duty for that basic participation for everyone. We can debate how much of a duty we have for further actions, working in pro-life organizations for political things and things like that. It's not an absolute duty, whereas voting is a pretty strong duty. And then there's a special honor to those who dedicate it full time. In that sense, right? Praising the work of those. I know several of them. Right now, the Premier of my own province, Danielle Smith, and the official leader of the opposition in Canada, Pierre Poilievre, are people I was acquainted with before I entered the seminary. I was quite involved in Canadian conservative politics at the time, Canadian Alliance Reform Party back in those days. I've never hid that, but what was one of the sacrifices I had to make when I entered the seminary was to say, I am renouncing my involvement in politics to be a priest. So, let's move on to 75B on civil law should provide for division of positive law and functions. Let's begin. If the citizens responsible for cooperation is to produce the good results, which may be expected in the normal course of political life, there must be a statute of positive law providing for a suitable division of the functions and bodies of authority and an efficient and independent system for protection of rights. The rights of all persons, families, and groups and their practical application must be recognized, respected, and furthered, together with the duties binding on all citizens. Among the latter, it will be well to recall the duty of rendering to the political community such material and personal service as are required by the common good. Rulers must be careful not to hamper the development of a family, social, and cultural groups, nor the intermediate bodies or organizations, and not to deprive them of opportunities for legitimate and constructive activity they should willingly seek rather to promote the orderly pursuit of such activity. Citizens, for their part, either individually or collectively, must be careful not to attribute excessive power to public authority, not to make exaggerated untimely demands upon it in their own interests, lessening in this way the responsible role of persons, families, and social groups. I didn't write any notes on this, but as I read it, I thought I should just make a little note here about what we mean by positive law. Positive law refers to laws which are not kind of inherent, not built into something like the law of gravity or things like that, but are positively written out. For example, the speed limit, the exact statutes on murder in your particular province, state, federal government, whatever. Those type of things are positive laws, written out laws. So when it's talking about having positive laws that structure the political community, that's what it's talking about. So the thing here is we need to divide individuals so we can focus on aspects of the common good, right? So there's going to be those kind of things where the suitable divisions where we have the president, like in the U.S., you have the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. Canada has pretty much the same, although the executive and legislative get united because the prime minister is just the leader of the party with the most seats in the House, things like that. But that is the kind of idea where we have. And now there's no absolute rule for this to be divided. How to divide this? One general principle I would say as a matter of prudence, not necessarily explicitly stated here, is that as you get larger and more complex, you need more people to take care of the common good. Nobody can really be an expert on all about agriculture, all about housing, all about defense in the United States of America or things like that, in national government in a large country, maybe in Monaco or San Marino or something. And so with that, you need a large number of people to be divided in those expertise. Whereas if you have a town of a few hundred, it's very fine to have a mayor who basically runs it all themselves and, has an election every 2 years to make sure that everybody still supports that mayor or things. And that's the reality that as we get bigger, we need more people because there's more things to take into consideration. There's also more practical things to do, right? So, for example, how do we determine, who gets this particular, money that's given out to farmers or given out to people who are poor or things like that? Well, we need to hire people to determine that because it's not just like immediately obvious. Okay, I look at the U.S., I can name all 1 million people who get this new farm subsidy that the government's giving out. No, I'm sure if the government is going to give out a farm subsidy, they would have some people who would analyze and determine who it's for. And what we note here is this idea of subsidiarity as well towards those smaller groups like families. Remember, subsidiarity is that principle of Catholic social doctrine where we say the smallest group that can do something should be empowered to do it. So, like, for example, the family can determine education, things like that. And then we have some duty to public service. I think the most basic duties are paying our taxes, obeying laws, even laws we might disagree with. If we think the speed limit should be 10 miles, 15 kilometers higher on this road, well, that's a totally reasonable thing to have a divergence of prudence about, but we should still obey those laws. And we should pay our taxes, vote, and obey laws. Now, other people are going to do much more for that, but that's the bare minimum. And finally, it notes that we shouldn't put all on public authority, right? So we don't just say, hey, public authority, you're taking everything. And at the same time, we need to look not just for our own private interests, but the common good when asking public authority for something, when seeking something for public authority. So let's move forward to C and D. On public authority now intervenes more, but must do so in a limited way. 75C. The complex circumstances of our day make it necessary for public authority to intervene more often in social, economic, and cultural matters, in order to bring about favorable conditions which will give more effective help to citizens and groups in their free pursuit of man's total well-being. The relations, however, between socialization and the autonomy and development of the person can be understood in different ways according to the various regions and the evolution of peoples. But when the exercise of rights is restricted temporarily for the common good, freedom should be restored immediately upon the change of circumstances. Moreover, it is inhuman for public authority to fall back on dictatorial systems or totalitarian methods which violate the rights of persons and social groups. D. Citizens must cultivate generous and loyal spirit of patriotism, but without being narrow-minded. This means that they will always direct their attention to the good of the whole human family, united by the different ties which bind together races, peoples, and nations. And so, in these two subparagraphs, we have C, which is talking about how, as we get more complex, the government intervenes more. And that is just the nature of things. And that's just how things would work practically. And it notes here this is going to vary a little bit culture to culture. So certain things are going to be acceptable or unacceptable in different cultures. And that's not necessarily good or bad. Some cultures are going to have more government, some are going to have less. It's a realm where the church leaves a good amount of prudence to individual cultures and leaders. And then it notes this should be limited. And as soon as possible in this intervention, freedom should be restored. And finally, it notes in paragraph 75C that dictatorship and totalitarianism are banned. We shouldn't bring down to those methods. That's not an acceptable way of governing because it doesn't involve all people, as we've noted in A and B. D talks about the good of patriotism. It's good to be patriotic. Have a Canadian flag or an American flag on your clothes, things like that. Celebrate the Independence Day of your nation. All those things are good. But we need to make sure we don't use this in a racist way where we say, hey, we're good and all you who are not Americans or not Canadians or not British or not white or whatever are bad. That's just not in accord with Catholic teaching. We see the good of all peoples as Catholics. Moving on to 75E. It talks about how Christians should witness to the common good in political action. E. All Christians must be aware of their own specific vocation within the political community. It is for them to give an example by their sense of responsibility and their service to the common good. In this way, they are to demonstrate concretely how authority can be compatible with freedom, personal initiative with the solidarity of the whole social organism, and the advantage of unity with fruitful diversity. They must recognize the legitimacy of different opinions with regard to temporal solutions and respect citizens, who even as a group defend their points of view by honest methods. Political parties, for their part, must promote those things, which in their judgment are required for the common good. It is never allowable to give their interest priority over the common good. So here, the Fathers of Vatican II are encouraging us to each be involved in the political community. We each have a vocation. We should serve this community, serve the common good in this community. And by our witness, we show the compatibility of rival values and tension. We recognize that there are people who disagree with us and who disagree with us politely, both in cases where it's very clearly contrary to Catholic teaching, say one group wants to legalize abortion, or other cases where there's a wide range of disagreement possible for Catholics. Finally, it notes different political parties and that they need to seek the common good and not seek their own private goods, their own specific goods. Honestly, this is a danger in the U.S. where I see sometimes where certain political issues, it seems that the parties have more advantage in not solving the problem for their own party, so they don't. It's an unfortunate thing. I think one example here where seeking the common good over our private good can be seen is something that people thought I should be completely offended by, but I was not. So, as I've noted before, I was born and raised in Canada. I'm a Canadian citizen by birth. And for a while, Canada has gone back and forth on this, but for a while, I had lost my right to vote in Canada. And the rules were that if you had not lived at least 180 days in Canada one of the past 5 years, or plan to return within the next year or two, you lost your right to vote. You couldn't vote in the federal election. To me, that seems quite reasonable because even though I'm a citizen of Canada, and I was a citizen of Canada when this law passed, I was not so involved in the common good of Canada because I'd been living in the U.S. for an extended period. This law goes back and forth, and I think, and right now I can vote, I'm registered to vote, and things like that. But I don't think it's necessarily wrong to say, hey, if you haven't lived in Canada for an extended period, you're not planning to come back right away, well, yeah, we don't want you voting. And that's a totally reasonable thing for a country to do, serving the common good, even though for me, it kind of doesn't serve my own personal good. Now, moving on to 75F, it talks about the need to form all in civics and form some for political office. F, great care must be taken about civic and political formation, which is of the utmost necessity today for the population as a whole, and especially for youth, so that all citizens can play their part in the life of the political community. Those who are suited or can become suited should prepare themselves for the difficult, but at the same time very noble art of politics, and should seek to practice this art without regard to their own interests or material advantages. With integrity and wisdom, they must take action against any form of injustice and tyranny, against arbitrary domination by an individual or a political party, and any intolerance. They should dedicate themselves to the service of all with sincerity and fairness, indeed with the charity and fortitude demanded by political life. This subparagraph is reminding us of the need for civic formation. Many times in high school, there's a class called civics. It's kind of sad that that's not a common practice today because that is a valuable thing to have for students to learn. Hey, there's 3 branches of the government, things like that. And some will need to prepare further for politics. As I've noted kind of in this last little bit, I was quite involved in this before I entered the seminary. I know several people quite involved in Canadian politics and things like that. And then when these people have trained, have worked in it, they need to serve politics, serve all justly in politics. They need to serve all, not just serve their own private interests, not just do it for money, for gain. And that's important. That's where we get some of these things in the U.S. where they have like stock trackers tracking the trades of different politicians and how they trade based on insider knowledge that they might have in government. And that's not the best thing to do. So thank you for listening to this episode of Vatican II in a Year. This is a listener-supported podcast, and you can donate to help StarCrest produce it, another great podcast, at sqpn.com/give. You can give one-time monthly or join the StarCrest Patreon. Tomorrow we're going to continue with the next paragraph, guiding the Spes 76. It's on the relationship between political community and the Church. Please join us to learn more about Vatican II, which can provide a blueprint for the Catholic Church. If you want more information on the podcast, like playlists and a reading plan, go to sqpn.com/Vatican, frmatthewlc.com/Vatican, or Vatican SQPN on Facebook and X.
Amen.